There are monsters who walk among us. They smile. They seem normal. They help people. They wear uniforms that symbolize care and compassion. And then, when no one is watching, they kill. This is the story of one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. A woman who murdered helpless infants and children. A woman who worked in hospitals and clinics where parents trusted her with their most precious treasures. Her name is Genene Jones, and for years she got away with it. Let me tell you about a place that should have been safe. A place where miracles happened every day. A place where tiny, fragile lives fought to survive. Bexar County Hospital, San Antonio, Texas. The Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, this unit had a problem. Babies were dying. More babies than should have been dying. Babies who seemed stable one moment would crash the next. Their hearts would stop. Their breathing would cease. And despite the frantic efforts of doctors and nurses, many of them died. The medical staff noticed something strange. These deaths and near deaths had a pattern. They happened during certain shifts, when certain nurses were working, specifically when one nurse was working. Her name was Genene Jones, and she was always there when a baby coded, always there during the emergency, always performing CPR, always trying to save the child. Some people thought she was unlucky, that she just happened to be present during these tragedies. Others thought she was a hero. Look how hard she fights to save these babies. Look how dedicated she is. She never gives up. But a few people, a very few, began to wonder, why does this keep happening when Genene is working? Why is she always the first to notice when a baby is in distress? Why do these emergencies happen so frequently on her shifts? These questions would eventually lead to one of the most disturbing revelations in medical history. Genene Jones wasn't trying to save babies. She was killing them. Chapter 2. Genene's Early Life. To understand how someone becomes a monster, we need to go back to the beginning. Genene Ann Jones was born July 13, 1950, in San Antonio, Texas. She was adopted as an infant by Richard and Gladys Jones, a working-class couple who desperately wanted children. By all accounts, Genene had a normal childhood, not abusive, not traumatic, just normal. Her parents loved her. She went to school. She had friends. But people who knew young Genene say she always craved attention, always needed to be the center of everything. If she wasn't getting enough attention, she'd create drama to get it. In school, she was a mediocre student, not stupid, but not exceptional. She didn't apply herself. She was more interested in socializing than studying. After high school, Genene drifted. She got married young, at age 18, to James Harvey Delaney Jr. They had a son together. Then the marriage fell apart. Genene was 21 and already divorced with a child. She needed a career, something stable, something respectable, something that would give her purpose. She decided to become a nurse. This decision would cost dozens of children their lives. Genene enrolled in a vocational nursing program in San Antonio. It was a one-year program, not as rigorous as a full RN degree, but enough to get her working in hospitals. Her instructors had concerns. Genene was sloppy. She made mistakes. She didn't follow protocols. She cut corners. But she passed. In 1977, at age 27, Genene Jones became a licensed vocational nurse. She got her first job at Methodist Hospital in San Antonio. Then she moved to another hospital, then another. She kept moving, never staying long at any one place. Why? We don't know for certain, but the pattern suggests problems at each facility. Personality conflicts, performance issues, things that made her unwelcome but not quite bad enough to get her fired. Then, in 1978, Genene Jones got a job in the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit at Bexar County Hospital. This is where the killing began, or at least, this is where it was first documented. Some investigators believe Genene may have been killing even earlier, but we'll never know for certain. What we do know is that once Genene started working in the PICU at Bexar County Hospital, babies started dying at an alarming rate. Chapter 3. The PICU, Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. Let me describe what a Pediatric Intensive Care Unit is like. It's a place of miracles and heartbreak. Tiny babies, some born months premature, weighing just pounds, fighting for life. Children with severe illnesses or injuries. Parents sitting by bedsides, praying, hoping, bargaining with God. The nurses in a PICU are special. They have to be. They're caring for the most vulnerable patients imaginable. Babies who can't tell you when something's wrong. Children whose conditions can deteriorate in seconds. A good PICU nurse is vigilant, knowledgeable, compassionate. They catch problems before they become crises. They comfort terrified parents. They work seamlessly with doctors. Genene Jones was not a good PICU nurse, but she was very good at appearing to be one. The PICU at Bexar County Hospital was a county facility. That means it served everyone, regardless of ability to pay. Poor families, uninsured families, immigrant families, the most vulnerable populations. The unit was always busy, always understaffed, always dealing with more patients than they had resources for. This created an environment where mistakes could be overlooked, where no single person had complete oversight, where someone like Genene could operate. Genene worked the 3 to 11 p.m. shift, evening shift, not as much supervision as day shift, fewer administrators around, more opportunity to act without oversight. And Genene took full advantage. Patients would be stable, then suddenly they'd code. Their heart rate would spike or plummet. They'd stop breathing. Alarms would sound. Staff would rush to the bedside, and there would be Genene, already performing CPR, already calling for medication, already fighting to save the child. Sometimes she succeeded. The child would be revived. Genene would be praised for her quick action. Sometimes she failed. The child would die. Genene would weep. She'd console the parents. She'd say she did everything she could. Either way, Genene got attention, got to be the hero, got to be at the center of the drama. This is what she wanted, what she craved, what she was willing to kill for. Other nurses started to notice, whispered conversations in break rooms. Did you see another kid coded on Genene's shift? That's the third one this week. Why does this keep happening when she's working? But no one wanted to believe it, because believing it meant accepting something unthinkable, that a nurse, someone sworn to care for patients, was deliberately harming them. So they rationalized. Maybe Genene just worked the sickest patients. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe she was unlucky. But the statistics didn't lie. During Genene's shifts, the death and near-death rate was exponentially higher than during other shifts. Something was very, very wrong. Chapter 4. The Methods. How did Genene Jones kill? She used medications. Specifically, she used drugs that were readily available in the PICU, drugs that, in proper doses, saved lives, but in improper doses, or given to patients who didn't need them, killed. Her weapon of choice was succinylcholine. It's a paralytic drug. It stops muscles from working, including the muscles you use to breathe. In proper medical settings, succinylcholine is used during intubation, when a tube is being placed in a patient's airway. The drug temporarily paralyzes the patient, making intubation easier. Then the patient is put on a ventilator until the drug wears off. But if you give succinylcholine to a patient who isn't being monitored, who isn't on a ventilator, they stop breathing, they die. And here's the insidious part. Succinylcholine breaks down quickly in the body. Within hours, it's nearly undetectable. An autopsy won't find it. Toxicology won't catch it. The perfect murder weapon. Genene also used other drugs. Heparin, a blood thinner that, in overdose, causes uncontrollable bleeding. Digoxin, a heart medication that, in overdose, causes cardiac arrest. These drugs were all in the PICU, all available to nurses, all part of normal medical care. But in Genene's hands, they became instruments of death. Here's how it would work. Genene would be assigned to a patient, a baby usually, sometimes a toddler, almost always someone very young, very vulnerable. She'd wait for an opportunity, when other staff were busy, when the doctor wasn't around, when the parents had stepped out for coffee or to use the bathroom. Then she'd inject the drug, either into an IV line or directly into the patient. Within minutes, sometimes seconds, the child would start to crash. Heart rate abnormal, breathing difficulty, full cardiac arrest. Alarms would sound, staff would rush in. Genene would already be there, performing CPR, calling for help, looking panicked and determined. If the child survived, Genene was the hero. If the child died, Genene was the dedicated nurse who fought to the end. Either way, she got what she wanted. Attention, drama, the chance to play savior. The parents never suspected. Why would they? This woman was trying to save their child. This woman was weeping with them. This woman seemed to care so deeply. They didn't know, couldn't know, that the person fighting to save their baby was the same person who poisoned their baby in the first place. Chapter 5. The body count rises. Between 1978 and 1982, dozens of children died or nearly died in the Bexar County Hospital PICU under suspicious circumstances. How many? We don't know exactly. Records from that era are incomplete. Some deaths weren't properly investigated. Some cases were written off as natural causes or complications from existing conditions. But investigators later estimated that as many as 60 children may have been murdered or harmed by Genene Jones during her time at Bexar County Hospital. 60 children. Let that sink in. 60 families who trusted the hospital to care for their sick children. 60 babies and toddlers who should have lived. 60 lives snuffed out by a nurse who enjoyed the attention she got from saving them. Let me tell you about some of them. Rolando Santos, 15 months old, admitted for pneumonia. He was improving, getting better. Then, on Genene's shift, he suddenly coded. His heart stopped. Despite resuscitation efforts, Rolando died. The official cause of death? Complications from pneumonia. No one questioned it. Patrick Zavala, 3 months old, born premature but doing well. Then he had unexplained seizures on Genene's shift. He survived but suffered brain damage. Why did a healthy baby suddenly have seizures? No one could explain it. Joshua Sawyer, 2 weeks old, admitted for minor issues. Suddenly stopped breathing on Genene's shift. Was revived but coded again hours later. Died the next day. The doctors were baffled. This baby should not have died. Albert Garza, 11 months old, in the hospital for a routine procedure. Suddenly went into cardiac arrest on Genene's shift. Survived but with permanent disabilities. Why would a healthy child have a heart attack? It made no sense. Case after case after case. All on Genene's shifts, all mysterious, all unexplained. And Genene was always there, always at the center of the crisis, always fighting to save the child. Some children survived her attacks. They'd code, be revived, and eventually recover. These children were lucky. They escaped with their lives, though some had permanent injuries. Others weren't so lucky. They died. Their parents buried them, grieved them. never knowing their child was murdered by someone who was supposed to care for them. And through it all, Genene kept working, kept killing, kept getting away with it, because no one wanted to believe, no one wanted to accept that this seemingly dedicated nurse was a serial killer. Chapter 6. The suspicions grow. But some people did start to believe. Dr. James Robotham was a resident in the PICU. Young, observant. He started noticing the pattern. Too many codes on Genene's shifts. Too many unexplained crises. He mentioned it to colleagues. They told him he was imagining things, that it was coincidence, that he was being paranoid. But Dr. Robotham wasn't paranoid. He was right. Nurse Susanna Maldonado also had suspicions. She worked alongside Genene. She saw things that didn't add up. Why was Genene always the first to notice when a baby was in distress? Why did she seem almost excited when a code was called? Why did she linger near bedsides even when it wasn't her assigned patient? Susanna mentioned her concerns to supervisors. They didn't take her seriously. Nurses gossiping about each other. Personality conflicts. Nothing to worry about. But it was something to worry about. Something terrible. By 1981, enough staff members had complained that the hospital administration couldn't ignore it anymore. They launched an internal review. They looked at death rates, compared shifts, analyzed patterns. The results were damning. During Genene's shifts, the mortality and morbidity rates were significantly higher than during any other nurse's shifts. This wasn't coincidence. This was evidence. But what were they going to do about it? Here's where the story takes a dark turn. The hospital administration had a choice. They could report Genene to law enforcement, launch a criminal investigation, expose what was happening, or they could handle it quietly, get rid of Genene without making a scandal, protect the hospital's reputation. They chose the latter. In March 1982, the pediatric ICU at Bexar County Hospital was suddenly closed. The official reason? Restructuring. The real reason? To get rid of Genene Jones without admitting there was a problem. The hospital didn't file a police report, didn't notify the Texas Board of Nursing, didn't warn other medical facilities. They just quietly transferred staff to other units. And they gave Genene Jones a neutral recommendation letter so she could find work elsewhere. Yes, you read that correctly. After concluding that Genene was likely killing babies, the hospital helped her get another job. This is one of the most egregious failures in this case. Hospital administrators chose to protect themselves rather than protect future victims. They knew, or strongly suspected, that Genene was dangerous, and they let her walk away. Let her get another nursing job. Let her have access to more vulnerable children. Their cowardice, their prioritization of reputation over safety, their moral failure. It cost more children their lives. Chapter 7. Kerrville Clinic. Genene Jones needed a new job. The PICU was closed. She couldn't work at Bexar County Hospital anymore, but she had a nursing license, and she had a recommendation letter from the hospital. A letter that said nothing about suspicions or investigations. Just a neutral, Genene Jones worked here from X date to Y date. In May 1982, just 2 months after leaving Bexar County Hospital, Genene got a new position at a pediatric clinic in Kerrville, Texas, a small town about 60 miles northwest of San Antonio, population 15,000. The clinic was run by Dr. Kathleen Holland, a young, idealistic pediatrician who had recently opened her own practice. She needed a nurse. Genene seemed qualified. She hired her. Dr. Holland had no idea what she was bringing into her clinic, no idea that she was about to become an unwitting accomplice to murder. The Kerrville Clinic was different from the hospital PICU. It was an outpatient facility. Children came in for checkups, vaccinations, minor illnesses. Nothing life-threatening. These were healthy children, or children with minor problems, ear infections, colds, routine pediatric care. But once Genene started working there, children started dying. Chapter 8. Chelsea McClellan. Let me tell you about Chelsea McClellan. Chelsea was 15 months old, a beautiful little girl with blonde curls and bright eyes. She lived with her parents in Kerrville. She was healthy, happy, normal toddler. In September 1982, Chelsea had been having some minor issues, not eating as well as usual, a little fussy, nothing serious. But her mother, Petty McClellan, wanted to have her checked out. So on September 17, 1982, Petty brought Chelsea to Dr. Holland's clinic. It should have been a routine visit. Check the baby, maybe prescribe some medication if needed, send them home. But Genene Jones was working that day. When Petty and Chelsea arrived at the clinic, they were taken to an examination room. Dr. Holland examined Chelsea, found nothing seriously wrong, maybe a minor infection. She decided to give Chelsea some shots, routine vaccinations that were due. Genene Jones prepared the injections. Now, here's what should have happened. Genene should have prepared the exact vaccines that Dr. Holland ordered. Nothing more, nothing less. But that's not what Genene did. In addition to the vaccines, Genene added something else to the syringe. We don't know exactly what, but based on Chelsea's symptoms afterward, it was likely succinylcholine or another paralytic drug. Genene injected Chelsea. Within minutes, Chelsea began to react. She became lethargic, unresponsive. Her breathing became shallow. Petty panicked. "Something's wrong with my baby." Dr. Holland rushed in. Chelsea was in distress, severe distress. They called an ambulance. Chelsea was rushed to the hospital in Kerrville, but she was deteriorating rapidly. The hospital in Kerrville wasn't equipped for this level of emergency. They decided to airlift Chelsea to a larger hospital in San Antonio. Genene Jones volunteered to accompany Chelsea on the helicopter, to monitor her, to help. During the helicopter ride, Chelsea coded. Her heart stopped. Genene performed CPR. Chelsea was revived. But she coded again and again. By the time they reached the San Antonio hospital, Chelsea had coded multiple times. Her brain had been deprived of oxygen for too long. Chelsea McClellan was pronounced dead on September 17, 1982. She was 15 months old. She went to the doctor for a routine checkup, and she died. Petty McClellan was devastated. Her healthy baby was dead. How? Why? What happened? The doctors couldn't explain it. Chelsea had no underlying health conditions. She shouldn't have died. An autopsy was performed. The cause of death was listed as acute cardiorespiratory arrest. But that's not really an explanation. That's just describing what happened. Her heart and lungs stopped. It doesn't explain why. Petty was told it was one of those tragic, unexplainable things. Sometimes children just die. SIDS, maybe, or an undiagnosed heart condition. But Petty had questions. Why did Chelsea suddenly get sick at the clinic? Why did it happen right after the injections? What was in those injections? She started asking questions, demanding answers, and slowly, a horrifying truth began to emerge. Chapter 9. Other Victims in Kerrville. Chelsea McClellan wasn't the only child who had a medical emergency at Dr. Holland's clinic. In the 6 months that Genene Jones worked there, numerous children had unexplained crises, seizures, respiratory arrest, cardiac problems, all in a small outpatient clinic where such things should never happen. Rolinda Ruff, 7 months old, brought to the clinic for a checkup, had a seizure in the clinic, rushed to the hospital, survived. Chris Parker, 5 years old, came in for a routine visit, suddenly stopped breathing. Emergency resuscitation, survived. Brandy Benitez, 7 weeks old, minor cold, brought to clinic, had a severe reaction, nearly died, survived. Jacob Evans, 4 months old, in for vaccinations, Sudden cardiac arrest at the clinic. Survived. Case after case. All at Dr. Holland's clinic. All when Genene Jones was present. What were the odds? What were the chances that so many children would have life-threatening emergencies at a small outpatient clinic? The answer: 0, unless someone was causing those emergencies. Dr. Holland started to suspect. She noticed that these crises only happened when Genene was working, never when other nurses were there. Only Genene. She also noticed something strange about Genene's behavior. She seemed almost energized during emergencies, like she thrived on the chaos, like she enjoyed it. Dr. Holland confronted Genene, asked her what was going on. Why were so many children having emergencies? Genene had excuses. Bad luck. The clinic attracted sicker kids. Coincidence. But Dr. Holland didn't believe her. Something was very wrong. And then Chelsea McClellan died. That was the final straw. Dr. Holland went to the authorities. Chapter 10. The investigation begins. September 1982. Chelsea McClellan is dead. Other children have had near-death experiences at Dr. Holland's clinic. Dr. Holland has reported her suspicions about Genene Jones. Finally, law enforcement gets involved. The Texas Rangers assigned investigator Joe Davis to the case. The district attorney's office got involved. A grand jury was convened. They started investigating, talking to witnesses, reviewing medical records, analyzing patterns, and they found exactly what Dr. Robotham and others had found at Bexar County Hospital: an undeniable pattern. Children died or nearly died when Genene was working. It didn't happen when she wasn't there. Statistical analysis showed the probability of this being coincidence was essentially 0. Genene Jones was killing children. Investigators interviewed Genene. She denied everything. She was a good nurse, a dedicated nurse. She would never harm a child. These accusations were outrageous. She claimed she was being scapegoated, that the hospital and clinic were trying to blame her for their own failures, that she was innocent. But the evidence said otherwise. Investigators got a warrant to search Dr. Holland's clinic. They were looking for evidence, medications that shouldn't be there, anything that Genene might have used to harm children. And they found something. Bottles of succinylcholine, the paralytic drug, more than the clinic should have had. And some bottles had puncture marks, evidence they'd been accessed multiple times. They also found bottles of other medications: heparin, digoxin, all drugs that could be lethal in the wrong doses. This was physical evidence, proof that Genene had access to the means to kill. The investigation expanded to Bexar County Hospital. What happened there? How many children died or were harmed during Genene's time in the PICU? This is where things got complicated. The hospital had destroyed records. Routine purging, they claimed, but it meant investigators couldn't access complete data. However, what records did exist showed the same pattern: high mortality and morbidity rates during Genene's shifts. Dr. Robotham and other staff members came forward, told investigators about their suspicions, about the patterns they'd noticed, about how they'd reported it and been ignored. Investigators also talked to pharmacists. At both the hospital and the clinic, unusual amounts of certain drugs had gone missing, particularly succinylcholine. Pharmacy records showed that Genene had checked out these drugs, far more often than any other nurse, and in larger quantities. But here's the problem. Hospitals in the early 1980s didn't have the strict controls they have now. Nurses could access drugs relatively easily. There wasn't always a clear chain of custody. Records were often incomplete. This made building a case difficult. Investigators knew Genene was guilty, but proving it in court? That was another matter. Chapter 11. The bottles. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence was discovered by accident. In October 1982, about a month after Chelsea's death, Dr. Holland was packing up her clinic. She'd decided to close it. Too much trauma, too many awful memories. As she was going through supplies, she found something strange. Several bottles of succinylcholine that she didn't remember ordering. Bottles with puncture marks. Bottles that had been tampered with. She called investigators immediately. The bottles were analyzed. Fingerprints were found. Genene Jones's fingerprints. Even more damning, the bottles showed evidence of being mixed with other substances. Genene hadn't just been using succinylcholine. She'd been creating cocktails, mixing drugs to make them more lethal or harder to detect. This was premeditation. This was sophisticated. This wasn't a panicked nurse making mistakes. This was calculated murder. Investigators also found Genene's personal notes. She kept a diary of sorts, recording her thoughts, her feelings about work. Some of the entries were disturbing. She wrote about the excitement of codes, about how she felt alive during emergencies, about how she was the best nurse because she could save babies that others couldn't. There was no explicit confession. Genene was too smart for that, but the entries revealed her psychology, her need for attention, her narcissism, her lack of empathy. A psychological profile was developed. Genene Jones likely suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a condition where someone harms others to get attention and sympathy. In Genene's case, she harmed children to create medical emergencies. Then she saved them, or tried to. This made her feel important, powerful, needed. She was addicted to the drama, addicted to being the hero, and she was willing to kill to get that fix. Chapter 12. The Arrest. October 12, 1982. Nearly a month after Chelsea McClellan's death, Genene Jones was arrested and charged with murder. Specifically, she was charged with 1 count of murder in the death of Chelsea McClellan and 1 count of injury to a child in the case of Rolinda Ruff, who survived. Why only 2 charges? Because building cases for the other victims was difficult. The evidence for Chelsea and Rolinda was strongest. Prosecutors decided to start there. When Genene was arrested, she maintained her innocence. "I didn't do anything wrong. I'm being set up. This is a witch hunt." She hired lawyers, expensive lawyers. She was confident she'd be acquitted, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The trial for Chelsea McClellan's murder began in January 1984. It took over a year to prepare the case, to gather evidence, to interview witnesses, to build an airtight prosecution. The trial was held in Georgetown, Texas, a change of venue from Kerrville because of intense local publicity. The case had been all over Texas news. Everyone knew about the killer nurse. The prosecution's case was strong. They had statistical evidence showing the pattern of deaths, physical evidence, the bottles with fingerprints, expert testimony about the drugs and their effects, witness testimony from doctors and nurses, Genene's own notes and statements. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that you couldn't prove Genene injected Chelsea with anything harmful, that Chelsea's death could have been natural, but the jury didn't buy it. On February 15, 1984, after deliberating for several hours, the jury returned a verdict: guilty. Genene Jones was convicted of murder in the death of Chelsea McClellan. The sentencing phase followed. The prosecution asked for the maximum sentence. The defense asked for leniency. The judge sentenced Genene Jones to 99 years in prison. Justice, finally. But it wasn't over. Chapter 13. The Second Trial. Remember, Genene had been charged with 2 crimes: murder in Chelsea's case, and injury to a child in Rolinda Ruff's case. The second trial began in October 1984. This trial was in San Antonio. The evidence was similar. Genene had injected Rolinda with something that caused a near-fatal seizure. The jury convicted her again. This time, She was sentenced to 60 years in prison to run concurrently with her 99-year sentence. So Genene Jones was facing 99 years. She'd be eligible for parole in, well, essentially never. She'd die in prison. Or so everyone thought. Chapter 14. The Victims We Know. Chelsea McClellan, Rolinda Ruff. Those were the cases that went to trial, but what about the dozens of other children who died or were harmed? Investigators identified numerous potential victims. Children who died or nearly died when Genene was working. Children whose deaths were unexplained or suspicious. But building cases for these victims was nearly impossible. Why? Time had passed. Evidence was lost or degraded. Records were incomplete or destroyed. Bodies had been buried. Autopsies, if they were even done, hadn't looked for poisoning. The drugs Genene used broke down quickly. Exhuming bodies wouldn't find them. So while investigators believed Genene killed or harmed 60-plus children, they could only prove 2 cases. Let me tell you about some of the victims we know about. At Bexar County Hospital, 1978 to 1982, Jose Antonio Flores, infant, died September 1981. Rosemary Vega, infant, died December 1981. Patrick Zavala, 3 months old, permanent brain damage from unexplained seizures. Albert Garza, nearly died from cardiac arrest. Joshua Sawyer, 2 weeks old, died after unexplained breathing problems. Rolando Santos, 15 months old, died after unexplained cardiac arrest. At Kerrville Clinic, 1982, Chelsea McClellan, 15 months old, died. Rolinda Ruff, 7 months old, survived. Chris Parker, 5 years old, survived. Brandy Benitez, 7 weeks old, survived. Jacob Evans, 4 months old, survived. These are just some of the names. There are many more. Some we'll never know. For the families, the revelations were devastating. Parents who thought their children died of natural causes now learned they were murdered. Imagine that. You buried your child, grieved, maybe even blamed yourself. If only I'd gotten them to the hospital sooner. If only I'd noticed something was wrong. And then, years later, you learn your child was murdered by a nurse, someone you trusted, someone who seemed to care. The trauma, the rage, the questions. Why my child? What did my baby ever do to deserve this? Some families sued the hospitals, civil lawsuits alleging wrongful death and negligence, and they had strong cases. The hospitals knew, or should have known, that Genene was dangerous, yet they let her continue working. They didn't report her. They even helped her get another job. Several families won settlements, millions of dollars, but no amount of money brings back a dead child. Chapter 15. Munchausen Syndrome by Proxy. To understand Genene Jones, we need to understand her psychology. What kind of person kills babies? The psychiatric diagnosis that best fits Genene is Munchausen syndrome by proxy, now called factitious disorder imposed on another. This is a mental disorder where someone harms another person, usually someone in their care, to get attention and sympathy. Classic cases involve mothers who make their own children sick. They poison them, suffocate them, make them ill. Then they rush them to doctors, play the devoted, worried parent, get attention and sympathy from medical staff. It's a form of abuse, a form of attention-seeking taken to murderous extremes. In Genene's case, the victims weren't her own children. They were patients, but the psychology was the same. She harmed children to create medical emergencies. Then she saved them, or tried to. This made her feel important, made her the center of attention, made her the hero. When a child survived, Genene got praise. "You saved that baby. You're such a good nurse." When a child died, Genene got sympathy. You did everything you could. It's not your fault. Either way, she got what she wanted. Attention. This is why she kept doing it. She was addicted to the attention, addicted to the drama, addicted to being needed, and she couldn't stop. Even when she knew people were suspicious, even when she changed jobs. She kept killing because she needed that fix. Experts who evaluated Genene also noted her narcissism. She believed she was special, better than other nurses, smarter, more skilled. In her mind, she wasn't murdering babies. She was creating opportunities to demonstrate her superior abilities. She lacked empathy. The suffering of the children and their families didn't register. They were props in her drama, tools for getting attention. This is what makes people like Genene so dangerous. They don't see their victims as human, just as means to an end. Chapter 16. Life in Prison. Genene Jones was sent to the Mountain View Unit, a women's prison in Gatesville, Texas. For years, she maintained her innocence. She gave occasional interviews claiming she was wrongly convicted, that she was a scapegoat, that the real problems were systemic failures at the hospitals. She showed no remorse, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, no empathy for her victims. This is typical of narcissistic offenders. Admitting guilt would require acknowledging they're not special, not superior, just a common criminal. Genene couldn't do that, so she clung to her delusions. In prison, Genene was a model inmate. She followed rules, stayed out of trouble, worked prison jobs. Why? Because model behavior looks good to parole boards. And remember, Genene was sentenced under Texas law as it existed in 1984. Back then, Texas had mandatory release laws. Prisoners earned good time credit for good behavior. Under those laws, even someone sentenced to 99 years could be released after serving a fraction of their sentence if they accumulated enough good time. Genene knew this. She played the game, behaved well, accumulated credits. And in the 2010s, a horrifying possibility emerged. Genene Jones might be released. Chapter 17. The Parole Crisis. Genene Jones had been in prison for 33 years. Under the old mandatory release laws, she had accumulated enough good time credit to be released. Her scheduled release date, 2018. The public was outraged. Victim families were devastated. She murdered our children and she's getting out? Prosecutors scrambled. How could they keep her locked up? The answer? Charge her with more murders. Remember all those other victims? The 60-plus children who likely died at her hands but were never prosecuted? Now, prosecutors went back to those cases. They exhumed bodies, re-examined evidence, built new cases. In 2017, Genene was indicted on 5 new counts of murder. 5 children from Bexar County Hospital. In 2018, she was indicted on additional charges. These new charges ensured she'd stay in prison. Even if she was released on the original sentence, she'd immediately be arrested on the new charges. Why didn't they charge her with these murders originally? Because the evidence was weak. The cases were old. Building prosecution seemed impossible. But, faced with the prospect of Genene going free, prosecutors decided to try anyway. Some of these new charges were dismissed. The evidence really was too old. Witnesses had died. Records were gone. But some charges stuck. In 2019, Genene agreed to a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to murdering 5 children at Bexar County Hospital. In exchange for the plea, she received a life sentence, no possibility of parole. Genene Jones, now 73 years old, will die in prison. Justice delayed, but finally justice. Chapter 18. The Systemic Failures. Genene Jones is a monster, but she didn't operate in a vacuum. She was enabled by systemic failures, by institutions that prioritized reputation over lives, by people who suspected but stayed silent. Let's talk about those failures. Failure number 1. Bexar County Hospital. The hospital knew, or strongly suspected, that Genene was killing babies. Their internal review proved it statistically. But instead of reporting her, they quietly got rid of her. Closed the PICU, gave her a neutral recommendation. Why? They were afraid of lawsuits, afraid of publicity, afraid of damage to their reputation. So they prioritized their institution over children's lives, and more children died as a result. This is unconscionable, criminal even. But no one at the hospital was ever charged with a crime. Failure number 2. The Texas Board of Nursing. When Genene left Bexar County Hospital, her nursing license remained active. She could work at any medical facility in Texas. Why? Because the hospital never reported her, never filed a complaint with the Board of Nursing. The board's job is to protect the public from dangerous nurses, but they can only act if they're notified of problems. Bexar County Hospital's silence meant the board never knew. Genene kept her license, kept working. Failure number 3. Medical oversight. In the 1970s and 80s, hospitals didn't have the same oversight and accountability mechanisms they have now. Drug access was poorly controlled. Nurses could check out powerful medications with minimal documentation. Death reviews were perfunctory. If a child died, doctors would note the cause and move on. No one looked for patterns. No one asked, why are so many children dying on this particular nurse's shifts? These failures made it easy for someone like Genene to operate. Modern hospitals have much better safeguards, but back then, it was shockingly easy to kill and get away with it. Failure number 4. Witness silence. Many people suspected Genene, Dr. Robotham, Nurse Maldonado, others, but they didn't push hard enough. When their concerns were dismissed, they let it go. Didn't go to authorities outside the hospital. Didn't make noise. Why? Fear of retaliation, fear of being wrong, fear of disrupting their careers. This is understandable, but it cost lives. When you suspect someone is killing patients, you have a moral obligation to keep pushing until someone listens. These failures led to reforms. In the wake of Genene's case, Texas and other states strengthened oversight of medical professionals, improved drug tracking, mandated reporting of suspicious deaths. But those reforms came too late for the 60-plus children Genene murdered. Chapter 19. The Survivor Stories. Not all of Genene's victims died. Some survived, and their stories are important too. Relinda Ruff. Relinda was 7 months old when Genene injected her with something that caused a seizure. She survived, but the seizure caused brain damage. Relinda grew up with developmental delays, learning disabilities, lasting effects from what Genene did to her. Her mother, Eva Ruff, testified at Genene's trial. She described the terror of watching her baby seize, the confusion of not knowing why, the relief when Relinda survived, and then the rage when she learned what really happened, that a nurse, someone trusted, had deliberately harmed her baby. Chris Parker. Chris was 5 years old when he had a respiratory crisis at Dr. Holland's clinic. He survived, but he remembers the experience. Years later, as an adult, Chris struggled with the knowledge that someone tried to kill him when he was a child. PTSD, trust issues, anger. He had to process the fact that he came very close to being another name on Genene's victim list. Jacob Evans. Jacob was 4 months old. He doesn't remember what happened, but his parents do. They remember rushing to the clinic because their baby wouldn't breathe. They remember the panic, the ambulance, the hospital. They thought it was a random medical emergency, something that just happened. Learning the truth years later was devastating. They'd trusted that clinic, trusted those medical professionals, and someone had used their baby as a prop in her sick game. These survivors and their families live with lasting trauma, the knowledge that they almost died, that someone tried to murder them. And they live with the question, why? Why me? Why my child? There's no good answer. Genene picked victims randomly, based on opportunity, based on who was vulnerable at the moment. It could have been anyone's child. That's part of what makes it so terrifying. Chapter 20. The Lessons. What can we learn from the Genene Jones case? Lesson 1. Listen to suspicions. When medical professionals suspect something is wrong, they need to be heard. Dr. Robotham and others raised concerns. They were dismissed. Hospitals need protocols for investigating suspicious patterns, and they need to take those investigations seriously. Lesson 2. Report dangerous professionals. Bexar County Hospital's failure to report Genene was catastrophic. They prioritized reputation over public safety. There need to be legal requirements and legal consequences for failing to report dangerous medical professionals. Lesson 3. Improve oversight. Modern hospitals have better drug tracking, better death reviews, better accountability, but there's always room for improvement. Technology can help. Automated systems that flag unusual patterns, AI that detects anomalies. We need to keep improving, keep finding ways to prevent people like Genene from operating. Lesson 4. Understand medical serial killers. Genene wasn't unique. There have been other medical serial killers, Harold Shipman in the UK, Charles Cullen in the US, Beverly Allett, Niels Hogel. These cases share common features: Munchausen by proxy, need for attention, access to vulnerable victims, positions of trust. Understanding the psychology helps identify warning signs, helps catch them before body counts get too high. Lesson 5. Support victims. The families of Genene's victims suffered immensely. Many didn't get justice. Their cases were never prosecuted. Society needs to support these families, provide mental health services, validate their grief and anger, and we need to keep telling their stories. Remember the victims. Don't let them be forgotten. Chapter 21. Where is Genene now? As of 2024, Genene Jones is 74 years old. She's incarcerated at the Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville, Texas. She has life sentences. No possibility of parole. She will die in prison. She's in declining health. Old age and prison conditions have taken their toll. Does she have remorse? We don't know. She rarely gives interviews anymore. When she does, she maintains her innocence or refuses to discuss her crimes. Some of her victims' families have tried to contact her, seeking closure, seeking answers. Why did you kill my child? Genene won't answer, or gives nonsensical responses. I didn't do it. It was the hospital's fault. I was trying to help. She'll likely go to her grave without ever giving these families what they deserve: the truth, an apology, an explanation. That's another layer of cruelty. Not just killing their children, but refusing to acknowledge it, refusing to give them closure. Chapter 22. The debate over numbers. How many children did Genene Jones kill? She was convicted of murdering 2, Chelsea McClellan and 5 children at Bexar County Hospital, through the plea deal. But investigators believe the real number is much higher. Some estimates say 60 victims, others say even more. We'll never know the exact number. Why? Records were destroyed or are incomplete. Many deaths were never investigated as suspicious. The drugs she used break down quickly. Autopsies wouldn't find them. Time has passed. Witnesses have died. Evidence is gone. Some people argue that calling her a serial killer who murdered 60-plus children is unfair if she was only convicted of a handful. But statistical evidence is powerful. The pattern of deaths during her shifts versus other shifts is undeniable. Medical experts who've reviewed the cases believe many of those children were murdered, and Genene herself in her plea deal admitted to killing 5 more children beyond Chelsea. So while we can't prove every case in court, the preponderance of evidence suggests Genene Jones is one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. Chapter 23. Other medical serial killers. Genene Jones is not unique. There have been many medical serial killers. Let's look at a few. Harold Shipman, UK. Doctor who killed 218+ patients, confirmed, over decades, gave them lethal doses of morphine, convicted in 2000. Charles Cullen, USA. Nurse who killed 29-400 patients, estimated, at multiple hospitals, used digoxin and other drugs, convicted in 2003. Beverly Allett, UK. Pediatric nurse who killed 4 children and injured 9 others, Munchausen by proxy, convicted in 1991. Niels Hogel, Germany. Nurse who killed 85+ patients, confirmed. Used heart drugs to cause cardiac arrest, convicted in 2019. Kristen Gilbert, USA. Nurse who killed 4+ patients, induced cardiac arrest with epinephrine, convicted in 2001. These cases share common features: access to vulnerable patients, access to lethal drugs, position of trust, psychological need for attention/control, went undetected for years. Medical facilities are particularly vulnerable to serial killers. Patients die in hospitals. It's expected. Distinguishing natural death from murder is difficult, and medical professionals have knowledge and access that make killing easy. This is why oversight is so important, why suspicious patterns must be investigated, why reporting is crucial. Chapter 24. The Families Today. What happened to the families of Genene's victims? Some have become advocates. They work with organizations that support families of murdered children. They campaign for better hospital oversight. They keep their children's memories alive. Petty McClellan, Chelsea's mother, became an advocate for victims' rights. She wanted Chelsea's death to mean something, to lead to changes that would protect other children. Other families struggled. Marriages broke apart under the strain. Some parents never recovered from the loss. Imagine burying your child, then learning years later they were murdered. That trauma on top of trauma broke some people. O'Brien degree. Wait, wrong case. Let me correct that. The siblings of victims also suffered, growing up in families marked by tragedy, living with the knowledge that their brother or sister was murdered. Some of these siblings are adults now. They're parents themselves. They look at their own children and think about what was taken from them, the aunt or uncle their children will never meet. Every February 15th, the anniversary of Genene's conviction, some families gather. They remember. They support each other. It's been 40 years since Genene was arrested, but the pain doesn't fade. Justice helps, but it doesn't bring back dead children. Chapter 25. Conclusion. Genene Jones is a monster. There's no other word for her. She murdered infants and children, helpless, innocent victims who trusted her, who had no way to defend themselves. She did it for attention, for drama, for the thrill of being the hero. And she did it for years. Killed 60+ children, estimated. Got away with it because institutions failed, because people stayed silent, because the system wasn't designed to catch medical serial killers. Her conviction and life sentence are justice, but incomplete justice. Most of her victims were never avenged, their cases never prosecuted, their families never got their day in court, and Genene will likely go to her grave without ever admitting what she did, without ever showing remorse, without ever giving these families closure. But we can honor the victims by telling their stories, by learning from what happened, by demanding better oversight and accountability in medical facilities. We can honor them by never forgetting. Chelsea McClellan, Rolando Santos, Patrick Zavala, Joshua Sawyer, Albert Garza, Rosemary Vega, Jose Antonio Flores, and so many others. Babies who never got to grow up, children who never got to live their lives, because a nurse decided they were props in her twisted need for attention. If you work in healthcare, be vigilant. If you see suspicious patterns, report them. Keep pushing until someone listens. If you're a parent, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, advocate for your child. Demand answers. And if you're ever tempted to stay silent because speaking up is uncomfortable or risky, remember the 60-plus children who died because people stayed silent about Genene Jones. Your voice might save a life. Genene Jones sits in a Texas prison. She's old now, sick, her life nearly over. But somewhere, parents visit graves, place flowers, remember children who should still be alive. That's Genene Jones's legacy, not the hero nurse she pretended to be, but a serial killer who destroyed families, a monster in scrubs. May she never be forgotten, and may her victims always be remembered. End.